The first mistake we make as thinking creatures is assuming the universe is supposed to make sense. We come stumbling into the world, wide-eyed and gullible, believing there's some hidden script, some narrative arc that ties it all together. Birth, struggle, love, disappointment, death, we assume they all add up to something. But what if they don't? What if the whole enterprise is just one bad joke told by entropy itself? A punchline stretched across galaxies, with us as the setup. You can almost hear the slow, wheezing laughter of the cosmos as stars collapse, as civilizations burn themselves out, as we write libraries full of philosophies just to convince ourselves there's dignity in all this fumbling. But the possibility we avoid, the one that really stings, is that existence is not tragedy at all, it's farce. Think about the structure of a joke. You set up an expectation, lead the listener toward a certain line of thought, then twist it, undercut it, shatter it. The punchline is not profound. It's absurd. It works precisely because it makes no sense. That's the universe. A setup that pretends it's leading toward meaning. But the closer you get, the more it collapses into nonsense. Why do we suffer? Why do we desire things we can never hold? Why do we live with constant awareness of death, knowing full well we'll never understand what comes after? There's no reason. These are simply the mechanics of the joke. The universe sets up a story of progress, beauty, rationality, and then pulls the rug out, delivering chaos, decay, and silence. And we, poor creatures of language and longing, laugh nervously in the dark, pretending it's not funny. But it is funny. It's horrifically, cosmically funny. The humor is grotesque, yes, but humor nonetheless. Kafka knew this when he wrote about men turning into insects, about bureaucracies so dense and absurd they become metaphysical prisons. Ligotti understood it too, in his Puppets and Towns that reek of existential rot, where the horror is not that life is painful, but that it's ridiculous. You can't help but feel the comedy in the image of a man who spends his whole life clawing toward a goal, only to discover, at the moment of death, that there was no goal, no higher order, just his own delusion stretched into infinity. It's not noble. It's slapstick. It's slipping on the banana peel of existence. Entropy, that slow, invisible comedian, has been working the longest set in history. Stars ignite like applause and then burn out to silence. Species crawl onto land, evolve consciousness, invent tools, art, gods, wars, and then vanish, leaving nothing but bones and faint echoes. Civilizations pile monuments against time, carving their names into stone, and entropy shrugs, buries them in dust, lets the wind erase the letters. Every human effort, from poetry to skyscrapers to moral systems, is just a build-up to the punchline. Nothing lasts. The joke doesn't end in triumph. It ends in heat death. And the punchline is that we still behave as if the outcome might be different this time. We write manifestos, launch rockets, fall in love, as though we're not already slipping down the cosmic whoopee cushion. Entropy must find us hilarious. And here's the kicker, we know it. Deep down, we sense the absurdity. That's why we laugh when we shouldn't, why funerals produce nervous chuckles, why gallows humor feels more honest than hymns. We laugh because somewhere, beneath all the layers of self-seriousness, we recognize the structure of the gag. The coffin is the rimshot. The universe is a stand-up comic who never explains itself, just keeps piling on setups and letting the audience squirm. So what are we supposed to do with this awareness? Despair is the obvious answer. If life is a joke without meaning, why endure the humiliation of being its punchline? But despair is still too serious, too tragic. It gives the joke too much dignity. The real response, perhaps the only one that doesn't play into the comic's hands, is to laugh along. Not a joyous laugh, not some transcendental acceptance, but a dry, bitter, knowing laugh. The laugh of someone who understands that meaning is a trick of timing, that our philosophies are elaborate setups with no payoffs, that even our suffering is only grim slapstick in the eyes of eternity. To laugh is to acknowledge the absurdity without letting it crush you. It is not redemption, not hope, just complicity in the joke. The problem is that most of us are bad audiences. We keep trying to treat the comedy as tragedy, insisting that the setup must lead somewhere profound. We write scriptures, invent gods who guarantee the punchline makes sense, who promise that suffering has purpose. But if the gods exist, they too are comedians, perhaps even hack comedians, recycling the same routine across dimensions. Here's the trick, they whisper. You live, you struggle, you die, and then, drumroll, you rot. Maybe there's an afterlife, but don't you see how easily that could be another gag? Imagine waking after death to find the same endless bureaucratic line, the same absurd obstacles, the same divine clerks misfiling your existence. Heaven might just be another waiting room, hell another punchline. This is why comedy and horror are so closely related. The structure is the same: setup, tension, reversal. In horror, the reversal is terror. In comedy, it's laughter. But both depend on the collapse of expectation. That's why the most terrifying stories are also funny, and the funniest jokes always contain a whiff of death. The clown's painted smile is grotesque precisely because it hints at rot beneath. And life itself, when viewed without illusions, is both horror and comedy, stitched together with cosmic thread. We laugh not because it's safe, but because it's unbearable. Consider your daily life. The alarm clock dragging you out of sleep, the commute, the emails, the bills, the endless repetition of chores. Isn't it absurd already? You repeat the same gestures every day as though they matter, as though tomorrow won't erase them, as though death won't reduce them to nothing. You argue with strangers online, defend opinions that will be forgotten in minutes, cling to little identities, nationality, job title, taste in music, as though they can shield you from the punchline. All this seriousness, all this posturing, and for what? To be forgotten by even your grandchildren. To be dissolved into soil while entropy smirks. If it weren't tragic, it would be hilarious. If it weren't hilarious, it would be tragic. Either way, you're the clown. And maybe that's the true cosmic joke, that we can't escape the setup. No matter how much we understand, no matter how clearly we see the absurdity, we still play our roles. Even as I write this, trying to articulate the futility, I'm participating in it, crafting sentences that will vanish into the digital ether, part of the same comedy. The awareness doesn't exempt us. It just makes us the hecklers who still paid for tickets. We are trapped in the audience, and the only choice left is whether to laugh bitterly or sit in stony silence while the routine goes on. But don't mistake this for optimism. Laughing doesn't redeem the absurd. It doesn't grant life meaning. It's just a gesture, a grim chuckle in the face of inevitability. If there's any freedom here, it's the freedom to recognize the parody and refuse to dignify it with solemnity. To grin at the absurdity of falling in love, knowing it will end in heartbreak or death. To smirk at the pomp of politics, knowing all empires crumble into dust. To see yourself in the mirror, aging, decaying, moving toward oblivion, and whisper, "Good one." That's the only defiance left to us. Not triumph, not enlightenment, just a willingness to laugh at the farce. So when you feel despair rising, when the weight of meaninglessness presses down, remember that despair itself is part of the setup. It's another gag, another twist in the cosmic routine. You expected dignity, you got absurdity. You expected truth, you got parody. You expected tragedy, but entropy tells jokes. That's the universe's style. Kafkaesque timing, Lagachian delivery, cosmic silence for a laugh track. And maybe, just maybe, if you lean into it, if you stop trying to force a narrative where there isn't one, you'll find the courage to laugh with the void. Not because it's okay, not because it will all work out, but because laughter is the only sound the abyss can't fully swallow. And so the curtain falls, the lights dim, the joke continues. We are the setup, entropy the punchline. The laughter never ends, it just echoes in silence, reverberating through dead stars and forgotten dreams. The universe doesn't care whether you laugh or cry, but laughter at least feels like stealing a beat from the comic's rhythm, like spitting in the face of the absurd. It is the bitterest form of joy, the only joy left. And when the final punchline comes, when heat death delivers its rimshot, we'll go down not as solemn martyrs, but as clowns who knew the joke and laughed anyway. The strange thing about realizing existence might be parody is how quickly it turns everything upside down. What once looked profound now looks like a pratfall. What once felt tragic now feels like clown makeup melting in the rain. Take our heroes, for instance. We venerate saints, kings, philosophers, revolutionaries, men and women who fought, who dreamed, who wrote. We carve their names in marble, print their words on banners, hold their stories up as lessons. But if the universe is telling a joke, then what are these figures except punchlines waiting to be delivered? Socrates drank hemlock for wisdom, only for entire civilizations to twist his ideas into slogans. Christ was crucified to save mankind, and 2,000 years later televangelists beg for cash in his name. Marx wrote about liberation, and his words were used to justify gulags. Is that not comic timing? The universe sets up its martyrs with grand speeches, and then entropy undercuts it with farce. The prophets thought they were opening the gates to eternity. In reality, they were feeding lines to the comic, setting up pratfalls that keep playing on repeat. You might say, but that's human corruption, not cosmic comedy. Perhaps. But look deeper. Doesn't it feel inevitable? Isn't every truth, once spoken, doomed to be misunderstood, corrupted, twisted, mocked? The more profound an idea, the more absurd its afterlife. That's entropy's favorite trick, turning earnestness into parody, meaning into caricature. It's as if sincerity itself is bait dangled before the void, and the void always bites. Consider love. The poets tell us it is sacred, divine, the closest thing we'll ever know to eternity. And for a while, it feels that way, the intoxication of desire, the delirium of connection, the sense that two souls have touched the infinite. But then, arguments, boredom, betrayal, death. One partner dies, and the other is left sobbing at a grave, whispering to the dirt. Or worse, the love simply fades, leaving two strangers pretending to be familiar. Where's the divinity in that? Where's the eternity? If it's not a setup for a joke, then what is it? You gave your heart to another person, believed you'd escaped mortality for a moment, and entropy giggled behind the curtain, waiting for the punchline. It doesn't last. Or think of ambition. A child dreams of greatness, spends years studying, working, suffering, sacrificing. They climb the ladder rung by rung, through humiliations and compromises, until they reach some position of power, some status. And then what? They die of a heart attack on the toilet. They're replaced within a week by another hungry climber. Their name is forgotten within a generation. That's the comic routine. Set up a grand illusion of progress, then yank it away with triviality. Caesar crossed the Rubicon, conquered the world, and was stabbed by his friends. Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and ended his life sick and exiled on a rock. Alexander wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, then died at 32 of fever, unable to conquer his own body. If it isn't tragedy, it's vaudeville. These titans strutted on stage, swelling with importance, and entropy threw cream pies at them until the audience howled. Even art, which we cling to as our last defense against absurdity, is not spared. We write novels to capture the soul of an era, paint canvases to trap beauty, compose symphonies to pierce eternity. And what happens? The works are misunderstood in their own time, reduced to cliches later, and eventually gather dust. How many masterworks have been burned, lost, misattributed, or mocked into irrelevance? For every Shakespeare, how many geniuses drowned in obscurity? And for Shakespeare himself, how many schoolchildren curse his name, forced to memorize lines they cannot love? What better proof that the universe plays jokes than the fact that our greatest triumphs are remembered as homework? Ligotti once said that consciousness is a mistake, a kind of evolutionary accident, and maybe that's true. But it's also the perfect setup for comedy. Imagine it. After billions of years of blind evolution, a species finally emerges that can ask, why? That can reflect, plan, despair, hope. A marvelous breakthrough, a triumph of complexity. And what do these conscious beings do with their gift? They torture each other, invent nuclear weapons, argue about politics on glowing screens. They write philosophies explaining why life is good, and then kill themselves anyway. They spend centuries dissecting the nature of reality, only to end up with quantum mechanics, a science that proves the universe is not just strange, but incomprehensible. The joke writes itself. We gained the ability to ask, "What does it mean?" only to discover there is no answer. We gave birth to reason, and reason revealed its own futility. It's like inventing a mirror, only to discover your face is a mask. And death is the ultimate gag. The setup is life itself. All your struggles, all your joys, all your learning, all your memories. You accumulate an entire library of experiences, a whole novel written in flesh. And then, in an instant, it's all erased. The lights go out, the body rots, the consciousness flickers off. The joke is not just that you die, but that you knew you would die all along and still played the game. You saw the punchline coming from the first page, and yet you kept turning the pages as if the ending might change. That's the deepest absurdity. If we didn't know death was coming, it would be tragedy. But because we do, and still persist, it becomes parody. A tragicomic farce acted out billions of times, with the same predictable ending. Entropy never has to improvise. The routine always works. And yet here's the darkest part: we cling to hope. That's our laugh track, our canned applause. We keep insisting that maybe there's more. Maybe science will conquer death. Maybe technology will outwit entropy. Maybe love will endure in some ethereal dimension. Maybe the soul survives. Maybe we're not fools but pilgrims on a meaningful journey. But notice how every hope is just another setup for the punchline. Transhumanists dream of uploading their minds to machines. But what if the server crashes? What if eternity turns out to be boredom? A digital hell of endless consciousness with nothing left to do. Religious believers hope for paradise. But what if heaven is just another bureaucratic nightmare? An endless waiting room with celestial music. Every hope is a joke in disguise, a setup waiting for entropy to deliver the reversal. The more desperately you cling, the harder the laugh. Maybe that's why laughter feels so close to despair. Both are eruptions of the same recognition. The collapse of expectation, the futility of control. When you laugh until you cry, when you cry until you laugh, you glimpse the truth. The boundary between comedy and tragedy is thinner than a hair. The universe is not merciful enough to grant us pure tragedy. It forces us to wear red noses and oversized shoes, to slip on banana peels as we march to the grave. You can sob about it, or you can chuckle, but either way you're in the circus. And here's the secret terror. What if there is no audience? What if the joke is not told for anyone, not even for entropy's amusement? What if the joke just tells itself, echoing in the void with no one listening? That would be the purest parody, billions of conscious beings laughing, crying, dying, and no one, not even the universe, gives a damn. A joke with no teller, no audience, no meaning. Just the mechanics of setup and punchline, repeating forever in the dark. That would be the bleakest humor of all. Not that we are laughed at, but that our laughter itself is meaningless, vanishing into silence. And yet, what else can we do? To despair is to take the joke too seriously. To hope is to miss the gag entirely. The only honest response is to play along, to acknowledge the farce without pretending it redeems itself. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to work, you make love, you suffer, you laugh, all the while knowing it's a parody. You can't escape the stage, but you can at least smirk as the spotlight fades. To laugh at the cosmic joke is not salvation, but complicity. It's the one gesture left to us, a dry chuckle, a bitter grin, a whispered, "good one," as the curtain falls. And perhaps that's all existence really is. The slow unfolding of a gag whose punchline we've always known, but never quite accepted. We are the setup. Entropy is the punchline. And the joke, like the universe itself, has no end. The first truth, if we dare call it that, is that we are ridiculous. Not heroic, not tragic, not even dignified, just ridiculous. A bipedal mammal, fragile and brief, convinced it has unlocked the secrets of the universe because it can scribble symbols on paper and mutter to itself in the dark. We call these mutterings philosophy, theology, poetry, and we treat them as torches against the void. But what are they really? They are the equivalent of a drunkard's ramblings at closing time, slurred, repetitive, half-believed. The cosmic bartender entropy, silence, the heat death that waits listens patiently, knowing all the while that closing time is inevitable. The drunk believes he is profound. The bartender knows he is just funny. We pretend that death is our great enemy, our tragedy. But if you look closely, you'll see death functions more like a punchline. All life is the setup, the struggle, the striving, the dreams, the careful planning, the love, the jealousy, the money hoarded, the books written, the monuments built. We expect the payoff to be transcendence, resolution, some grand meaning. Instead, the curtain drops. The body rots, the name fades, the achievements are undone. A neat reversal, perfectly timed. The punchline is merciless, but also strangely elegant. Imagine the absurdity of it. 1 minute you're composing symphonies or drafting constitutions or kissing someone's lips, and the next you're food for worms. It is slapstick at a cosmic scale. And yet, we can't help taking ourselves seriously. We imagine ourselves protagonists in some divine drama, and we search for signs of the plot everywhere. Religions sprout from this need like weeds from pavement cracks, each promising the joke is not a joke at all, that it all leads somewhere: paradise, enlightenment, salvation. But notice how quickly even those promises collapse into absurdity. Heaven is painted as a realm of eternal bliss, yet what could be more comically unbearable than endless perfection? A sitcom that never ends is torture. Even joy, stretched to infinity, becomes parody. Nirvana claims to extinguish desire. But isn't that simply the comic final act of a species who spent millennia desiring things they couldn't keep? Salvation is just another gag, another setup that collapses under its own weight. The philosophers who deny religion do not escape either. Take the rationalists, who insist meaning can be constructed from reason. They tell themselves the universe is a machine that can be understood, its gears and levers revealed by science. But what did we discover when we looked close enough? Quantum mechanics, where cause and effect blur into madness. A reality that doesn't obey its own rules, particles that exist and don't exist, cats that are both alive and dead until someone looks. If that's not a joke, then the word has lost all meaning. We wanted truth, and the universe handed us a riddle with a smirk. Reason itself turned into parody the moment it gazed too deeply. History, too, betrays the joke. Think of Rome. Centuries of conquest, discipline, law, architecture, and empire that imagined itself eternal. Then entropy entered with barbarian hordes, plagues, and economic collapse. The great marble city turned to rubble. Centuries later, tourists wander its ruins eating gelato, snapping photos, and buying t-shirts. What better parody could there be? Or think of the Soviet Union, a vast machinery of ideology, millions sacrificed for the dream of a perfect society. Where is it now? Collapsed, mocked, remembered mostly through memes and kitsch. History doesn't dignify its players. It mocks them, turns their sacrifices into comic footnotes. Every empire imagines itself divine. Every ideology claims inevitability. And entropy waits patiently with a banana peel. Even our technology, which we treat as our triumph over absurdity, becomes absurd itself. The internet, that great cathedral of knowledge, is a parody machine. For every library of science and philosophy it contains, there are 10 libraries of cat videos, conspiracy theories, and people arguing about pizza toppings. We invented godlike machines and used them to produce nonsense at scale. We dreamed of curing disease and ending hunger, but what do we actually do with our brilliance? We invent apps that let us swap faces with celebrities. We design algorithms that make us addicted to scrolling meaningless feeds. Is this progress or parody? The answer hardly matters, because the result is the same: laughter echoing from the void. And when we look inward into our own psychology, the joke only sharpens. We are creatures who crave happiness, yet our very brains are designed to deny it. We adapt to every pleasure until it grows dull. We long for stability, yet are wired to feel restless once we achieve it. We want freedom, yet collapse under the weight of choice. It's as if our minds were engineered not for joy, but for endless dissatisfaction. And what do we do in response? We write self-help books, record motivational podcasts, attend seminars where gurus tell us to think positive. Imagine it: a species so desperate for happiness that it pays strangers to shout cliches at them. If that isn't parody, nothing is. Art notices all this, of course. Beckett wrote plays where nothing happens and then everyone dies, and audiences applauded because they saw their own lives reflected. Kafka imagined courts and castles where no justice or entry is possible, bureaucracies so absurd they become eternal. Ligotti whispered that consciousness itself is a mistake, that existence is a puppet show with strings we can't cut. Even comedians like George Carlin glimpsed the truth. The whole show is nonsense, and the only sane response is bitter laughter. The line between the tragic playwright and the stand-up comic is thinner than we admit. Both describe the absurd collapse of expectation. Both reveal that life is parody, whether you howl in terror or chuckle in resignation. Children reveal the joke too. Watch them. They play, they laugh, they take everything as a game. Then they grow up, and we smother them with seriousness. Careers, mortgages, politics, religion. And yet adulthood is no less silly than childhood, just more desperate. An adult in a suit shouting at another adult about quarterly earnings is no less ridiculous than a child yelling about who gets the bigger toy. The only difference is that the child doesn't pretend the game is eternal. Children, in their laughter, understand something we forget: that the world is a sandbox, and entropy will kick it over no matter how carefully we build. And so here we are, trapped in this theater where the lights never quite go on, where the comedian never stops. We can take it seriously, fall into despair, cry out for meaning that never arrives. But that only makes us funnier. We are the clowns who don't know they're clowns, solemnly performing our pratfalls. Better, perhaps, to join in the laughter. Not the joyous laughter of redemption, not the comforting laughter of community, but the dry, bitter laughter of recognition. To smirk at our own foolishness, to chuckle at our ambitions, to grin in the face of our mortality. It is the only rebellion left to us. We cannot silence the joke. We cannot rewrite it. But we can laugh at the timing, laugh at the absurdity of ever expecting anything else. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not escape from the joke, not transcendence beyond it, but complicity. To accept the parody and still perform. To know you are a puppet and still dance. The joke doesn't care whether you despair or laugh. Entropy will deliver its punchline regardless. But in choosing to laugh however bitterly, you steal one moment of rhythm from the comedian. You refuse to let the parody crush you into solemnity. You grin, you shrug, you whisper, "Good one," into the void. And then the lights go out, and the joke continues. So remember, the universe is not a tragedy, not a hymn, not even a horror story. It is parody, absurd parody. We are the setups, entropy the punchline. And when the final rim shot echoes through the collapsing stars, there will be no applause, no curtain call, only silence. But in that silence, if you listen closely, you might swear you still hear it. The faint, bitter laughter of every being who ever lived, echoing endlessly into the dark.